Sometimes the most painful moments in life aren't when people leave us. It's when we start believing we weren't enough for them to stay. That's where the real wound begins. You begin to question your worth, replay conversations, dissect every moment, trying to understand what you could have done differently. But here's the truth. You can't lose something that was never aligned with your growth. You only lose what wasn't meant to go where you're headed. We spend so much time trying to prove our value to people who have already made up their minds about us. It's exhausting, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You find yourself explaining your heart to people who don't have the emotional capacity to understand it. But the first step toward emotional strength, the awakening, is remembering who you are without needing anyone to confirm it. Think about it. Every time you bend yourself to fit someone else's expectations, you're shrinking the very essence that made you unique. You start editing your truth to make others comfortable, when in reality, your authenticity was never the problem. It was their inability to meet you where you stand. People often mistake your kindness for weakness, your patience for permission, and your love for dependence. But the moment you wake up and realize that your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it, everything changes. You stop chasing validation. You stop performing for acceptance. You start moving with a quiet confidence that doesn't need applause. That's what I call emotional awakening. It's when you stop saying, "Why did they leave me?" and start asking, "Why did I stay so long where I wasn't valued?" This awakening doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, sometimes painfully, through disappointment, rejection, and heartbreak. But every emotional blow is actually a message. It's life saying, "Wake up. You've forgotten who you are." And when you finally hear that message, something in you shifts. You stop needing to be chosen. You start choosing yourself. Psychologically, this is a shift from external validation to internal self-affirmation. It's the difference between being reactive and being self-directed. You stop allowing the world to dictate how you feel about yourself. And that's where your real power begins. Because when your self-worth is no longer negotiable, people's behavior stops having so much control over your emotions. It's interesting. The people who undervalued you will only start to see your worth when you stop seeking their approval. That's the paradox. When you were available, they couldn't see your value. When you withdraw your energy and focus it inward, they start to feel the absence. Because your energy was never ordinary. You brought light, and when light leaves, darkness becomes uncomfortable. But here's the key. This awakening isn't about making them regret it. It's about evolving to a place where their regret doesn't even matter anymore. Where you no longer crave an apology, an explanation, or closure. You realize that peace is not something they can give you. It's something you reclaim. Philosophically, awakening is about identity. It's remembering that you were whole before they arrived, and you'll be whole after they're gone. It's about seeing your life not as a series of losses, but as a series of lessons designed to bring you closer to your authentic self. Every rejection redirects you towards self-realization. Every goodbye frees up space for your next chapter. And when you truly internalize that, you stop living in survival mode. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who were never meant to understand your journey. You begin living in what psychologists call a state of self-agency, where your emotions, your decisions, and your sense of peace are under your control. That's freedom. That's emotional maturity. It's like cleaning a foggy mirror. For the first time, you see yourself clearly again, and you realize you were never broken, just blurred by the opinions of others. So, if you've been doubting your worth lately, I want you to remember this. You don't need to chase what doesn't see your value. You don't need to explain your heart to people who only understand convenience. The right people will recognize your light without you having to dim it. The awakening is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's peaceful. It's the moment you look in the mirror and think, I'm done begging to be seen. It's the beginning of everything that's about to change. And when that moment comes, when you truly remember who you are, you won't want them to regret losing you. You'll be too busy becoming the person you were always meant to be. Silence. It's one of the most misunderstood forms of strength we have. When someone hurts us, our first instinct is to respond, to explain, to defend, to prove that we didn't deserve it. We want to be heard. We want closure. We want them to understand the damage they caused. But here's the truth: silence often says what words can't. Silence is not absence. It's presence without participation. The first emotional test you face after being hurt is how you handle that silence. It's a psychological battlefield, because your mind will scream, say something, prove your side, make them see what they've done. But emotional maturity begins when you realize that silence can be your greatest power. It's not about giving up. It's about rising above the need to be understood by people who have already decided not to understand you. When you stop reacting, you reclaim control. Most people don't realize this the moment you respond emotionally. Manipulation, disrespect, or dismissal, you hand over your power. They now control your mood, your day, your focus. But when you stay silent, you're telling the world, my peace is not up for negotiation. That's emotional intelligence in motion. The ability to manage your emotions, not suppress them, but channel them wisely. Silence also has a psychological effect on others. It makes them confront the absence of your energy. When someone is used to you reacting, to you explaining, pleading, or arguing, your silence creates a void. It's uncomfortable for them. It forces them to sit with their own conscience, their own guilt, their own uncertainty. You don't need to scream your worth when your silence already echoes it. This isn't about manipulation or playing games. It's about discipline, because it takes real emotional discipline to not reply to disrespect, to not chase clarity, to not correct someone's false narrative about you. But that's where your growth happens. When you learn to resist the temptation to react, you gain emotional distance. And from that distance, you gain perspective. Philosophically, silence is the bridge between impulse and wisdom. It's the pause that separates reaction from response. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but the state of being unshaken by external chaos. They taught that power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering your inner response to them. That's exactly what silence does. It turns chaos into clarity. There's also a deep psychological truth here. When you stay silent, you create space for emotional processing. Most people rush to speak because silence feels unbearable. It forces them to sit with discomfort. But discomfort is where growth begins. In that silence, you begin to see patterns, not just what they did, but why it affected you so deeply. Maybe it touched an old wound. Maybe it revealed what you've been tolerating for too long. Silence helps you listen, not to them, but to yourself. And that's the shift that changes everything. You move from trying to be heard to learning to hear your own intuition. That's when your silence becomes power, not passivity. It's not that you don't care anymore. It's that you finally care about the right things: your energy, your boundaries, your future. There's a reason the strongest people in the world are often the quietest, because they've learned that truth doesn't always need defending. That time reveals everything words can't. Silence doesn't erase your message, it amplifies it through your absence. When you stop engaging, people start reflecting. They remember what your presence felt like, the warmth, the effort, the consistency. And when that's gone, the silence becomes a mirror they can't avoid. But let's be honest, staying silent isn't easy. It takes practice. It's an emotional test precisely because your ego will fight it every step of the way. Your ego wants to be right. Your heart wants to be heard. But your soul, your higher self, wants peace. Choosing silence means you're choosing your soul over your ego. You're saying, I'm no longer in the business of convincing anyone to see my worth. And when you reach that point, you become untouchable. Not cold, not indifferent, just untouchable. Because now your self-worth isn't dependent on anyone's reaction. You understand that silence doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've evolved beyond needing to win. You've learned that not every battle deserves your energy. So the next time you find yourself tempted to argue, explain, or defend, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to achieve here? If the answer is peace, silence is your strategy. Because peace doesn't come from being right. It comes from being free. Remember, this silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the evidence of it. It's the space where dignity lives, where wisdom grows, and where the noise of others can no longer touch you. Detachment is one of the hardest emotional lessons you'll ever face because it asks you to hold love in one hand and freedom in the other. It's not about giving up, and it's not about caring less. It's about learning to love without losing yourself in the process. That's the second emotional test, the test of detachment. And passing it will change everything about the way you experience relationships, heartbreak, and even your own identity. Here's the truth: most people confuse attachment with love. They think intensity equals depth, that constant communication equals connection. But attachment isn't love, it's dependence. It's the fear that without this person, you'll collapse. It's tying your emotional state to someone else's presence, attention, or approval. And that's dangerous because it hands your peace over to something outside your control. Real love, the healthy kind, exists only when two complete people choose each other, not when two broken people cling to each other to feel whole. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop bleeding for people who don't know how to hold you. It means you start protecting your emotional energy the way you'd protect your physical safety. From a psychological perspective, attachment is rooted in the fear of loss. When you attach too tightly, you're not holding on because of love. You're holding on because you're afraid of what their absence will reveal about you. Maybe it'll reveal loneliness. Maybe it'll reveal insecurity. Maybe it'll expose how much of your identity was built around them. But here's the beauty of detachment. It forces you to face those fears head on. It teaches you that what you fear losing externally is often something you've already lost internally, your sense of self. Philosophically, detachment is liberation. It's the practice of loving people for who they are, not for what they give you. It's choosing to stay open-hearted, even when things end, because your worth doesn't depend on anyone staying. You learn to appreciate without possession, to connect without control. That's emotional maturity, the understanding that you can care deeply and still walk away when peace costs too much. There's a quiet kind of power in being able to say, I love you, but I'll let you go if I have to. Because what that really means is, I choose me. It's not selfish, It's self-preserving. You can't pour love into someone else from an empty cup. You can't fix anyone by breaking yourself. Detachment reminds you that walking away doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it means you've finally learned the lesson. And yes, it's painful. Detachment hurts because it dismantles the illusion of control. You can't force someone to see your value, to change their behavior, or to meet you where you are. The more you try, the more you exhaust yourself. But the moment you stop chasing, when you finally let go with grace instead of anger, something incredible happens. You create space. Space for peace, for clarity, for better things to enter your life. In relationships, we often believe that letting go means losing. But letting go doesn't erase love. It just removes suffering. It's the shift from attachment to acceptance. Instead of saying, "I need you to stay," you start saying, "If you go, I'll still be okay." That's emotional freedom. The great spiritual teachers and philosophers have echoed this for centuries. From the Stoics to the Buddhists, they've all said, in their own way, that suffering comes from clinging. When you detach, you don't lose the ability to love, you lose the need to control. You become grounded. You become steady. And suddenly, the chaos around you doesn't shake you the way it used to. It's interesting. Once you master detachment, people start treating you differently. The same energy that once made you desperate now makes you magnetic. Because calm confidence is irresistible. You're no longer begging to be seen. You're standing in your worth. You're no longer chasing, you're attracting. Detachment shifts your energy from lack to abundance, from needing love to embodying it. And that's when people start to notice. They feel the difference. They sense that you no longer depend on their presence to feel valuable, and that awareness often triggers their regret. But by that time, you're not even focused on them anymore. You're too busy enjoying the peace that comes with emotional independence. Detachment doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. It doesn't mean shutting people out. It means not letting their chaos live inside you. It's the art of holding space for love while holding boundaries for your soul. So if you're in a place right now where you're trying to let go, but it feels impossible, remember this: detachment is not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. It's waking up each morning and choosing peace over pain, self-respect over desperation, clarity over confusion. And with every choice, you take back a piece of your power. Because the truth is, love without detachment becomes a prison. But love with detachment, that's freedom. It's the kind of love that doesn't demand, doesn't beg, doesn't lose itself trying to be enough. Forgiveness, the very word, can make people flinch because it's often misunderstood. When you've been betrayed, lied to, or abandoned, the last thing you want to hear is, "You need to forgive." It almost feels like an insult, like you're being asked to let someone off the hook who never even apologized. But forgiveness has never been about them. It's about you. It's about releasing yourself from the emotional debt of what happened so you can finally move forward. That's the third emotional test, and it's the hardest one to pass. See, when someone hurts you deeply, your mind creates an emotional contract. It says, "You owe me," an apology, an explanation, justice, something. And until that contract is fulfilled, you carry it everywhere. In your thoughts, in your heart, in your energy. Forgiveness is tearing up that contract, not because they paid what they owed, but because you're done carrying it. You realize that holding on to that resentment doesn't punish them. It poisons you. Psychologically, forgiveness is an act of self-liberation. It's the emotional equivalent of cutting yourself loose from an anchor that's been dragging behind you. And here's the hard truth. Most people don't fail at forgiveness because they're cruel. They fail because they misunderstand it. Forgiveness doesn't mean you condone what happened. It doesn't mean you allow someone back into your life. It means you refuse to let the past continue to control your peace. There's a powerful shift that happens when you stop asking for closure from the person who broke you. Because closure isn't something they can give, it's something you create within yourself. You stop waiting for them to understand your pain, and instead, you begin to understand your own patterns. You start asking deeper questions. Why did I tolerate that behavior? What part of me was seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it? And those answers become the foundation of your healing. Philosophically, forgiveness is the triumph of consciousness over ego. The ego wants revenge. It wants to see them regret, suffer, or realize what they lost. But consciousness, that higher part of you, understands that revenge keeps you tied to their energy. The longer you stay focused on what they did, the longer they stay relevant in your story. Forgiveness, then, is the act of reclaiming authorship of your life. It's saying, you were a chapter, not the whole book. And it's not easy. Forgiveness can feel unnatural because your emotions will keep pulling you back toward anger. Your mind will replay the betrayal like a movie you can't stop watching. But every time you choose forgiveness, you interrupt that cycle. You're not pretending it didn't happen. You're refusing to let it define you. You're choosing to rewrite the narrative from "they broke me" to "they taught me." It's important to understand that forgiveness doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to send that text, not to stalk their social media, not to bring their name up again. That's forgiveness in action. Quiet decisions that build peace over time. You won't wake up one day completely free of anger, but you will wake up one day realizing it no longer controls you. Think about it. When you forgive, you stop being the victim of your story. You become the witness, the observer, the person who learned and moved on. That's emotional mastery. That's the point where healing stops being a reaction and becomes a decision. And here's the paradox. Once you truly forgive, people who hurt you often feel it, because your energy changes. You stop vibrating in pain, and you start radiating peace. You stop looking backward, and suddenly, they start to. They sense that shift. The absence of your resentment feels like distance they can't cross anymore. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's evolution. You rise so high emotionally that their chaos can't reach you anymore. But let's make something very clear. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean you allow the same pattern to repeat. In fact, real forgiveness is the foundation of stronger boundaries. It's saying, I release you, but I remember the lesson. Because forgiveness without wisdom is naivety, and forgiveness with wisdom is growth. There's a psychological freedom that comes when you forgive without needing reconciliation. It means you no longer need validation from the person who hurt you. You're no longer waiting for them to fix something inside you, because you've already done it yourself. That's when you know you've passed the test. Not when you say the words, I forgive you, but when their name no longer triggers your peace. And maybe that's the real measure of healing. When your past no longer defines your emotional present. When you can look back and feel gratitude for what it taught you instead of pain for what it took. That's the quiet victory that nobody else sees, but you feel in every breath. So, if you're still holding on to anger, don't rush yourself. But also don't stay stuck there. Forgiveness isn't a gift to them. It's a release for you. It's how you close one chapter with grace so the next one can begin with freedom. Because the truth is, the moment you forgive without needing closure, you step into a higher version of yourself, one that no longer needs revenge to feel powerful. There's always a moment, sometimes months later, sometimes years, when the people who once took you for granted suddenly see you again. Not the version they dismissed, not the broken one who begged for understanding, but the version that healed, evolved, and stopped needing them. That's when realization hits them. That's when regret sets in. But by then, you've already outgrown the version of yourself they knew. You see, people often don't regret losing you because of what you did wrong. They regret losing you because they finally see what your presence actually meant. And that realization usually comes in your absence. It comes when they experience the silence you left behind, the emotional stability you used to provide, the kindness they thought was ordinary, but was actually rare. You can't teach people your worth while you're still trying to prove it to them. Sometimes you have to step back, evolve, and let distance do the teaching. Psychologically, what's happening here is fascinating. Human beings normalize what they have constant access to. The brain adapts. It stops seeing the extraordinary as extraordinary. And that's exactly what happens when you overextend yourself for someone. Your consistency becomes expected. Your compassion becomes routine. Your support becomes background noise. It's only when you remove it that they realize what they lost. Because absence resets perception. And this is where emotional strength comes full circle. Passing the earlier tests, silence, detachment, forgiveness, prepares you for this phase. You've rebuilt your sense of self. You've reclaimed your power. And now, life has a way of revealing that truth to those who once underestimated you. But here's the part most people miss: the goal isn't to make them regret it. The goal is to reach a place where their regret no longer matters. Because regret is about them. And your growth is about you. The moment you stop living for someone else's recognition, you become unstoppable. You stop needing to be seen because you've learned how to see yourself. You stop waiting for them to circle back with an apology because you already moved forward with purpose. Regret, on their part, becomes irrelevant, a byproduct of your evolution, not the reason for it. And make no mistake, they will notice. When you start glowing differently, when your silence no longer hides pain, but peace, when your energy becomes grounded instead of reactive, people sense it. They'll say things like, "You've changed," and you have, because healing changes your posture, your tone, your presence. It changes how you walk into a room and how you leave one. You carry yourself differently when you no longer crave validation. But let's pause here and talk about what's really happening beneath that glow. Growth has a vibration. It's calm, steady, and self-contained. You stop chasing chaos, so you stop attracting it. You stop explaining yourself, so you stop inviting confusion. You learn to live in alignment instead of defense. Philosophically, that's the essence of transformation, the evolution from reaction to awareness. You stop being shaped by what broke you and start being defined by what you built from it. And ironically, that's when the tables turn. The same people who ignored you will now watch you closely. The same ones who doubted you will start asking for advice. Not because they've suddenly become wiser, but because your growth has become undeniable. It's visible. It's magnetic. And their regret is simply a reflection of that realization. But here's what you have to remember. Don't let their regret become your validation. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You've already passed the tests that mattered. The tests of silence, detachment, and forgiveness. You've already done the hard work of turning pain into perspective. Don't undo that progress by seeking acknowledgement from people who only value after you're gone. True confidence is quiet. It's the kind that doesn't need to announce success or parade healing. It simply exists because the real flex isn't in showing them what they lost. It's in becoming someone who no longer measures worth through other people's recognition. That's what makes your transformation powerful. Think about it, the same experience that once broke you has now become the foundation of your strength. The same silence that once felt unbearable is now your sanctuary. The same loss that once made you feel small has become your awakening. That's the full circle of growth, not revenge, not regret, but realization. So when they finally realize what they lost, don't turn around. But don't reopen that chapter just because the ending finally makes sense to them. Because it already made sense to you the moment you chose peace over pain. You don't need to relive what you've already outgrown. The closure they're seeking is the peace you already found. And maybe that's what this whole journey has been about. Realizing that people's regret is never your reward. Your reward is the strength you gained, the clarity you earned, and the calm you now live in. Their regret is their teacher. Your growth is your triumph. So when they look back and finally see your value, let them. But don't slow down. Don't dim your light for a backward glance. Keep walking, because your future deserves the version of you that finally understands your worth. There comes a point in your journey where the noise fades. The anger, the disappointment, the need to prove yourself, it all starts to quiet down. You stop rehearsing the past in your mind. You stop replaying the moments that broke you. And for the first time in a long time, you feel something that doesn't depend on anyone else. Peace. That's when you realize you've passed the final emotional test. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally learned how to care for yourself differently. You've become the person you once needed. This is what emotional victory looks like. Not the kind you can post online, not the kind that comes with applause, but the quiet transformation that happens inside you. The kind that shifts your energy from survival to stability, from bitterness to balance. Because real strength isn't loud. It's not in the speeches you make or the boundaries you announce. It's in the calm confidence of knowing who you are and what no longer deserves your energy. The journey to this point isn't easy. You've walked through silence, detachment, forgiveness, and all the emotional turbulence that comes with them. You've learned how to stop reacting, how to release what you can't control, and how to let go without hate. But this last stage, the victory within, is where everything integrates. It's where wisdom replaces pain. Psychologically, this is what therapists call self-actualization. The moment you stop defining yourself through external experiences and start defining yourself through internal awareness. You no longer measure your worth by how people treat you or how things turn out. You measure it by how grounded you remain through it all. That's when your emotional world becomes stable. It doesn't mean life stops testing you. It means you respond differently to the tests. And here's what's fascinating when you reach this level of emotional maturity. You stop seeking closure through confrontation. You start finding it through understanding. You realize that not everyone has the emotional capacity to give you what you gave them. And that's okay. You stop needing apologies to heal. You stop needing validation to move on. Because you've built something unshakable inside you. Self-trust. Philosophically, this stage is about transcendence. It's moving beyond reaction, beyond the ego's constant hunger for justice or recognition. It's realizing that peace isn't something you find. It's something you create through awareness, boundaries, and acceptance. You begin to understand that every person who left, every disappointment you endured, was shaping you into someone who could finally stand alone without feeling lonely. You start to see life differently. The same experiences that once triggered you now teach you. The same silence that once hurt now feels sacred. You understand that people weren't meant to complete you. They were meant to reveal the parts of you that needed healing. And once you heal those parts, you don't crave the old patterns anymore. You don't chase what you've outgrown. You don't resent those who left. You wish them peace, not because you want them back, but because you've found yours. There's also a deep psychological shift that happens when you stop chasing closure from others. Your brain rewires itself around new emotional associations. The things that used to activate pain now activate reflection. The things that once drained you now teach you discernment. You stop labeling experiences as good or bad and start seeing them as necessary. Everything becomes data. Everything becomes wisdom. And the more you live in that awareness, the freer you become. You stop fearing loss because you understand that you never really lose anything that's meant for you. You stop fearing rejection because you see that rejection often redirects you to better alignment. You stop fearing loneliness because you realize solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. When you reach that place, you no longer look for revenge or recognition. You're not trying to make anyone regret losing you. You've evolved beyond that story. You're too busy building peace, protecting your energy, and creating a life that reflects your growth. That's what emotional victory really means. Not proving anyone wrong, but proving yourself right. Showing yourself that you could rise, rebuild, and remain kind in a world that tried to harden you. And that's where the cycle completes. Because the real win was never getting them back. It was getting yourself back, the version of you that's self-assured, self-aware, and deeply at peace with how far you've come. The version that doesn't chase anymore, doesn't beg anymore, doesn't break anymore over what's temporary. You start to embody peace in such a way that people can feel it before you speak. You become the calm after your own storm. So if you're standing at this stage, if you've walked through heartbreak, silence, letting go, forgiveness, and growth, understand that you're already winning. You've passed every emotional test life could throw at you. You've evolved from reaction to reflection, from need to neutrality, from chaos to calm. And now you're not just surviving, you're leading yourself. And that's the real transformation, not in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. Because once you reach this point, you stop looking back for validation and start looking forward with intention. You realize the world doesn't need your pain, it needs your wisdom.